Hello and welcome to ID Talk, answers from an infectious disease expert. I'm Dr. Sean Elliott, a pediatric infectious disease specialist with Tucson Medical Center, professor emeritus of pediatrics at the University of Arizona College of Medicine, and medical director of infectious diseases and immunizations at the Arizona chapter of the American Academy of Pediatrics. This podcast has been created to answer questions from our chapter's members about the COVID-19 pandemic and increasing about anything else infectious disease or infection prevention. This is the week of July 24th, 2023, and it remains, again, a continued dull roar of viral gastroenteritis in the emergency departments, with still yet some respiratory illness precipitating reactive airway disease and wheezing and croup and all sorts of fun things. Questions are starting to surface from the news media about return to school in Arizona and, of course, what that entails and all the fun infections that kids can start to exchange and bring home from their school and daycare exposures. So it remains just a fun, exciting time. If you are tuning in from other parts of the country, welcome. I'm so glad that you're here and listening to us. And I expect you're all experiencing the same thing as well. So this week, again, some fantastic questions. There's been some updates from the Advisory Committee on Immunization Practices, the ACIP, from their June 2023 meeting. That was at the end of June. And the first question has to do with what are the updates from that June meeting. So actually, there's some pretty interesting stuff, not huge amounts of surprise and some forward movement. The first one that actually has impact on pediatrics was the ACIP's vote on influenza vaccine, and that is to approve influenza vaccine for all eligible persons 6 months of age and older, including those who have an egg allergy. As I think, hopefully, most of you are aware, there are influenza vaccine products available and on the market specifically designed for those who may have an egg allergy and which avoid any exposure to ovalbumin, which is the critical component of the vaccine support system. So absolutely there are products that can be used safely for those individuals. I believe we talked last time about the indications for the live attenuated influenza vaccine and, more importantly, the indications against that. So most of the vaccines available, and especially the ones for those who may be egg allergies sensitive, are going to be the inactivated injected form. Just an important qualification there. So quadrivalent inactivated vaccines are out there and available and are now officially indicated for everyone 6 months of age and up, regardless of allergy status. So that's for influenza vaccine. The other, which has immediate impact, actually several others with immediate impact on pediatrics, was that the ACIP now approves use for pneumococcal vaccine of either of the new products, that being the new 15-valent pneumococcal conjugate vaccine or the new 20-valent conjugate pneumococcal vaccine. And again, this is a podcast, so I'm not here to specifically support any one manufacturer. I think you all know what those products may be. The data from both looks really, really good, including for increased immunogenicity against some of the current isolates that appear to be causing invasive disease around the country. And of course, they add a couple additional coverage for a couple additional invasive isolates as well. So superior products, we just keep getting better and better and better. Note the 20-valent conjugate pneumococcal vaccine has been approved for some time for adult medicine, and it's just about time we got that for pediatrics as well. So that is out there. It's recommended for 2 to 23 months of age for your primary and your booster series. And then for the COVID-19 vaccine, the ACIP voted to approve or even suggest that a single dose of the updated COVID-19 vaccine may be reasonable for kiddos who are aged 2 years and older, specifically 2 to 4 years of age. Now, when they say updated COVID-19 vaccine, currently that means the bivalent, the sort of the newest products of messenger RNA vaccines from either Pfizer or Moderna. As we can imagine, there will be new vaccine products coming out from both of those in the messenger RNA platform to reflect the newest circulating subvariants of Omicron. So as of right now, that looks to be the XBB.1.5, and that is the principal circulating variant, although, of course, that will change at some point in time, and it may already be changing. So going going forward, infants 6 months to 23 months of age for their first exposures to COVID-19 vaccine still require the multi-dose series, and that being either 2 doses for Moderna or 3 doses for Pfizer. But kiddos who are 24 months of age or 2 years of age and older, now, per the ACIP, can sufficiently and adequately be vaccinated as a primary series with a single dose. So that is kind of super exciting. It's going to make it easier to prepare and hopefully protect our children against upcoming flares or surges in COVID, SARS coronavirus 2 as that occurs. Other actions. So the RSV vaccine for adults ages 60 and older was approved, and it's a single dose for those ages 60 and older. They use the term shared clinical decision making, and what that really means is that those adults ages 60 and older who may have a risk for severe disease from RSV, and you can imagine whom they may be. This is those with underlying chronic lung disease, immunodeficiency, advanced age, etc., may benefit from protection by the RSV vaccine. It is relatively decently efficacious, meaning, of course, no vaccine is 100%, but efficacies of 60% and over have been quoted, and that's fantastic. There's really no downside to that, so I think it's just 60-year-old person, you get to have another vaccine, yippee, but actually here's some really good reasons to get it, so you decide, but we strongly recommend RSV vaccine for those 60 and older. Obviously not a pediatric indication, but it does suggest and confirm that there is ongoing movement forward to support and approve the emerging vaccine products for RSV. And vaccine can be either a traditional vaccine or, as is the case in many cases, passive immunity vaccine with a monoclonal antibody vaccine. We'll talk more about the new pediatric version of that with another question in just a sec. The ACIP reviewed the clinical considerations for use of the RSV vaccines for women who were pregnant, and also the newest product, the nirsevimab for pediatrics. They're not yet prepared to make a formal recommendation, but that is coming. And in fact, the strong suggestion is, and per agenda, that ACIP will vote on the pediatric RSV vaccine, the second product, the nirsevimab, at its August meeting, which is coming up very soon. In fact, you may be listening to this podcast right when the ACIP is meeting. It's slated to be discussed on either August 3rd or August 4th, so coming up super soon. So some movement forward for RSV. Other indications or other actions by the ACIP last June, again, mostly had to do with adults in terms of strongly recommending polio vaccination, primary polio vaccination for adults who are 18 years of age and older who have not yet been vaccinated. That makes sense because, of course, we know we have polio rip-roaring here in the States, and especially still in the state of New York. And then, again, back into pediatrics, approval of the pentavalent meningococcal vaccine for patients ages 10 and older. So there's that sort of pre-adolescent and adolescent indication. And this is a new pentavalent vaccine product, including the traditional ACYW135, and adding to that B. You probably recall meningococcal vaccine for type B has been a long time coming, and there are finally products which are now commercially available which produce a lasting seroprotective response. That has been a hero's work in getting to this point, because that serogroup B has been notoriously difficult to address. It now works, and Pfizer has a new pentavalent product which combines all of those. So the ACIP voted that in those patients who are due for both the traditional quadrivalent ACYW135 and the MenB vaccines at the same visit, that they can instead get the pentavalent, this new product, and have similar expected efficacy. So those are the major actions. I think one more thing which does affect us, and that is that the ACIP, which advises the Vaccines for Children program, ACIP voted for VFC to include their updated recommendations for the pneumococcal vaccine products, that being either the 15 or the 20 valent, and also the influenza vaccine for all kiddos ages 6 months of age and older. So those vaccine products should be included for those of you who are participating in the VFC program. Okay, great question. I guess as a follow-up then, the next question says the FDA approved Beyfortus, which is the nirsevimab, that's the monoclonal antibody product number 2 against RSV for infants. FDA approved this product for infants and toddlers. Do I anticipate it being ready to use in the upcoming 2023-2024 season? Boy, I wish I had a crystal ball for that. And in talking actually last weekend at the Arizona AAP chapter's annual CME meeting, talking with representatives from that company, the answer is a cautious yes. So, here are the details. First of all, Beyfortus is the product name. Nirsevimab is the name of the actual generic name, I guess. And this is a monoclonal antibody. It's a single intramuscular injection. And it currently, as per the FDA, is or will be licensed for use in all infants in their very first RSV season. So infants and babies who will encounter RSV during the traditional, typical season all deserve a single intramuscular injection of this product, and it carries superb protective efficacy lasting throughout what would be the expected length of the RSV season. There is also a secondary recommended indication for infants who are older than, infants who are going to encounter their second RSV season. And I'm being careful with the language here because to do an age cutoff would exclude inappropriately some babies who just missed the initial age cutoff and yet are seeing RSV for the first time. So second indication is those babies who have a risk for severe RSV disease and are going to experience their second RSV season deserve a second injection, or if they haven't received it before, their first injection. So those are the FDA-approved indications. The ACIP, as I mentioned just recently, will take this matter up officially for a vote to approve in August 3rd or 4th coming up, so in just like another week or so. So that's fantastic, great, wonderful. Every expectation is that the ACIP will vote to approve, and this again stems from the June meeting where they discussed the indications and the data and the efficacy and were very supportive of moving forward. They were just not yet ready to move forward officially in June because FDA gets first crack at this. So we can expect, I think, official ACIP approval, which will be followed rapidly by signing off from the CDC, which is the final step. And then the manufacturers of Beyfortus, which is otherwise known as Nirsevimab. So the manufacturers of Nirsevimab plan a science meeting by their advisory council. This is the manufacturers, by the way, for mid-August to take up the anticipated approvals and then plan a rollout. This will also, I think, be looked at and addressed by the AAP as well, just to do its input on this. And I think we can anticipate all this to be accomplished this summer with then a up production of the product, and it'll be ready on store shelves, or should be ready on store shelves early fall. So those are the expectations, those are the anticipations. Again, this is based on a whole bunch of anticipation on my part, but also communication with the science reps of Sanofi Pasteur and others involved in the process of Nirsevimab / Beyfortus. So fingers crossed. I think there's high hope that we'll have a second product on the market which has even more open indications for use and has some really exciting protective efficacy. And just as an FYI, there's a third product out there which is concluding its data for efficacy outcomes and long-term assessment. And that product is also expected to be put forth to the FDA and then subsequently ACIP for approval as well. So likely not by this coming RSV season, but I expect by the next one, so 24-25, it is likely that there will be three monoclonal antibody products available for use to protect our babies against RSV. And wouldn't that be an amazing thing? Those of you in hospital medicine are saying yes. It'd be a game changer in terms of hospitalization rates and census of the hospital. So fingers crossed, everybody. Okay. Moving on, next question. The World Health Organization has reported dozens of babies sickened by enterovirus in Europe. Do we expect to see cases here in the United States? And if so, what should we keep an eye out for? So yes, absolutely correct questioner. The WHO and other health organizations from Europe and the United Kingdom and even parts of Eurasia are reporting discrete either cases or clusters of neonatal sepsis with enterovirus E11. This is actually an echovirus. And keep in mind, when we use the term enterovirus, that's an all-inclusive family name which includes enterovirus, echovirus, and Coxsackie virus. So in this case, it's echovirus E11, which has been causing neonatal sepsis, meningitis, myocarditis and death in babies discretely throughout, we'll say, Europe, UK, and Eurasia. And specific numbers as of now 2 weeks ago, and beginning in 2022, 26 total cases, 8 of whom unfortunately expired with complications of their illness. Yeah, so you're like 26 out of the entire world over the last year, and so how big a risk is this? But it actually is a risk because we are still encountering cases of neonatal enteroviral sepsis meningitis here in the States, and also have had recent heads up against enterovirus D68, the one associated with acute flaccid myelitis. In this past summer was supposed to have been the year, because it's an every other year phenomenon, and thankfully there were not many cases reported at all. So we are already screening for clinical cases associated with enterovirus, and we have had cases of neonatal enteroviral sepsis and meningitis. Including me personally, have managed five in the last several months, one of whom unfortunately did expire. So there's already severe enteroviral disease here. The reports from the other part of the world have or detail a specific enterovirus, which I think we can add to our general cause for concern. So is it already here? Not so far as we know. And here's a great big asterisk/caveat. The majority of laboratories, commercial labs, and hospital labs are not performing typing of enterovirus when it occurs in a human patient. And even many of the state labs do not either, because there's really not a huge return on investment. And other than epidemiologic tracking purposes, it doesn't really matter. The enterovirus acts as the enterovirus acts. So far as we know, we do not have Echo E11 here stateside, but the CDC is passively screening for that, and other infectious disease organizations are screening for reports from their members. So specifically the Pediatric Infectious Disease Society has put out a notice from Dr. Creech to say, hey, be on the lookout. If you have an enterovirus case, we need to know about it, first of all, and it would be reportable to your county health department, and if possible to coordinate virus clade testing through either the state lab and or the CDC. That would be advisable. So that's the current status. It may be here, we don't know if it is, but we're all on the lookout for neonates with enteroviral disease. What should we be looking out for? And basically and unfortunately, a sick baby. Yep, sorry, not very helpful, but that's exactly what the deal is. So an infant, especially in the first several weeks of life, is the biggest concern, and we'll even say over the first 2 months. So that baby who comes to the emergency department and then is likely hospitalized with fever and some early signs of sepsis. So it could be anything, right? It could be rhinovirus. It could be group B strep. It could be any of the typical pathogens experienced in young infants who are being evaluated for sepsis. But in the cases of the Europe, UK, and Eurasia cases, they came in with fever or reports of fever and then escalated into more overt signs of sepsis and shock. So mottling, decreased perfusion, soft blood pressures progressing to hypotensive shock and crisis, evidence of multi-organ dysfunction, meaning transaminitis for the liver, acute kidney injury with elevated creatinine levels and decreased urine output, irritability, frank seizures suggesting meningitis. So all of the worrisome things which we would look for and identify in any case of a baby who comes in with fever are what are being reported with those babies who progress to enterovirus. What should we do with that information? Because we're going to see this, somewhat commonly, especially as we approach the winter season and more viruses return and secondary bacterial infections occur. I think it would be, if at all possible, to have a very low threshold and a high index of suspicion to send testing for enterovirus from CSF specimens if the babies undergo lumbar puncture and or respiratory panel to try and identify it if in any way possible from a nasopharyngeal respiratory panel. So this does mean increasing use of molecular diagnostics of those PCR-based panels, which are very sensitive, very specific. And normally you may ask, what's the return on sending this fairly expensive test? I mean, am I going to change my management? And the answer is you will not likely change your management, but if you identify enterovirus from the spinal fluid in a, for example, 7-day-old, that's a baby who might benefit, A, from much closer expectant management, looking for evidence of meningitis, sepsis, shock, and death. Also, potentially considering the use of IVIG. Why IVIG? Well, because there is no highly efficacious antiviral medication against the enterovirus family. Yes, there are drugs that have some efficacy, especially in the hematology-oncology world. Pleconazole and cidofovir are two drugs that have been mentioned, but they have incredibly high risk adverse effects associated with them, especially renal failure, hepatitis, bone marrow suppression, etc. And their efficacy is really quite poor. So there's really no antiviral medication usable for babies who have enteroviral sepsis, meningitis, and shock. IVIG then creates passive immunity, which, as you would imagine, many blood donors from whom IVIG is harvested have been exposed to and developed infection from enteroviruses, including likely the enterovirus causing sepsis in your baby. So the IVIG is theoretically able to provide passive immunity and some support to that still yet immature immune system from your infant patient to give them some fighting tools with which to address the enteroviral sepsis. And another theoretic benefit would be just the oncotic support of blood pressure, right? So giving them, rather than albumin as a way to increase intravascular volume, instead we give IVIG, which may have immunoprotective benefit. This has not been tested in a randomized placebo-controlled trial. Huge caveat in terms of the evidence-based medicine. So any benefit of IVIG is based almost entirely on anecdotal case reports and case series. So there you go. There's some more shared decision making. And of course, the parents or caretakers of the infant need to know that one is using a purified human blood product, but with, I think, a very decent amount of theoretic evidence to support its use in those babies. So this gets back to what do we do with that baby who looks sick, history of fever is mottled, has emerging shock, and evidence of multi-organ dysfunction. The primary recommendation is have a low threshold and high index of suspicion for enteroviral sepsis in that baby. Send the molecular testing if at all possible, and if positive, both informing prognosis but also considering use of IVIG. Clearly, this is likely to be done, I hope, in a tertiary hospital with benefit of infectious disease consultation and obviously critical care medicine. But this at least gives us what we can give our parents to expect. Okay, last question then. This is a fun one. So what evidence has been shown that the flu vaccine could have protective efficacy against RSV? You're like, wait, what? Influenza vaccine, RSV is a different virus. And actually, it's a great question. It comes out of a very recent report this month coming out of Australia that looked at, in Australia, a population study of children who were hospitalized with RSV and whether they had received or not received influenza vaccines previously. The actual indication for the study was to look at protective efficacy as Australia had a campaign of free flu vaccines for all of their children in that particular region. And they were actually looking to see initially, did it work? Did it decrease hospitalizations for flu? But then they, as secondary information, also looked at hospitalizations for other viruses. This study found a rate reduction of 2.27 per thousand patients of kids hospitalized for RSV who were also immunized against influenza that year. So that's as far as the study goes, and very appropriately the authors say there's a whole bunch of potential confounders there. This study was not in any way designed to look at cause and effect. In no way did they claim that flu vaccine has protective efficacy against RSV. And you could easily think, just outside the box, gee, if you're flu vaccinating a patient, then they're less likely to be hospitalized or come to urgent care for flu complications, and therefore less likely to be exposed to RSV in a healthcare setting. So maybe that is the whole reason, right? So all it really says is that there was a population dynamic finding that is not randomized, is not controlled, is not proof of causation, is not proof of anything other than look at that. That's the extent of that study. And not to minimize the author's work, it's very important. And it does, I think, give us some interesting directions to pursue. Actually, this has already been pursued. So go back to 2018, and there's a study which looks specifically at live attenuated influenza vaccine and something called non-specific effects of vaccination with that. What that means is that specifically with the live attenuated vaccine, that the cell line used, or perhaps the attenuation process of the virus, triggers increased innate immunity at the level of the nasopharynx, the level of introduction of other viruses, that has a short-term protective effect against other viruses, including RSV. And so these researchers in 2018 did demonstrate that, and that's super cool. It was a short-lived effect, and it was in no way a specific vaccination effect against RSV by the live attenuated flu vaccine, but it was an increase in innate immunity. Yeah, you get to have a little return with me to the land of immunology. Sorry about that. Very briefly, the human body, as our other immune systems, is sort of broken down into two major components, the innate immune system and the adaptive immune system. Innate immunity, you can think of it as everything that you were born with and which is active on day one. So things like skin, which is a huge, protective barrier, mucus generation, the mucociliary elevator, enzymes in the alimentary canal, even antimicrobial peptides like the beta defensins and complements are part of the innate immune system, and so too then are neutrophils. So neutrophils, as a good friend and colleague in immunology says, are the first and the last part of the defense system in terms of addressing microbes. First, because neutrophils circulate and roll along our blood vessels looking for cytokine signaling of diseased cells, and then enter into that tissue space and follow the chemical signal to then, engulf and phagocytose the infectious microbial particles, or in some cases, an already diseased cell. Last, because the neutrophils are then further activated by other elements of the adaptive immune system, now with antibodies and complements and other paintings of a cell as being diseased, to then go in and clean up the debris. So it is likely that the non-specific effect of the live attenuated flu vaccine served to trigger and increase complement cascade and potentially to activate neutrophils so that they were ready and waiting for any newly introduced virus or viral particles which were starting to attack nasopharynx and respiratory epithelium. That is the hypothesis, and so far that has not yet been further formally tested that I was able to discover in a laboratory setting or in an animal model. So back to the question, what evidence has shown that flu vaccine protects against RSV? Scant would be the evidence, would be the answer, but there is an exciting possibility there. And certainly as we look to a day in the very, very, very near future where we'll be vaccinating against SARS-CoV-2, influenza, and RSV successfully in our babies, that combination vaccine products may have crossover protective efficacy for reasons that we don't yet clearly understand. That, I think, is super awesome, and certainly, once again, a huge testament to the success of vaccine science and technology, and we live in a day and age, thank heavens, in which this is quite robust. So, yay, fantastic, wonderful, fingers crossed for yet more. So with that, thank you for listening again to ID Talk, and a huge shout out to all of our Arizona members and anyone tuning in from anywhere else in the country. Welcome as well. Arizona AAP members can submit questions for future episodes to covid@azaap.org. The Arizona AAP would like to acknowledge the generous support of this podcast by the Arizona Department of Health Services through the Title V Maternal and Child Health Services Block Grant Funding. For more information and resources related to COVID-19 in Arizona and other infection prevention and infectious disease topics, or to learn how to become a member, please visit us at azaap.org. And in the meantime, and until next time, thank all of you once again for your service. Keep fighting the good fight. Keep the ears open for cool emerging new science and bend things to benefit the health of our children, and keep those questions a coming. Thanks, everybody.